It all began with flashing red and blue lights cutting through the quiet night in Beverly Hills. The neighbors stood frozen on their driveways as police stormed the mansion gates. And there she was, Victoria Hayes, the elegant wife of millionaire businessman Richard Hayes, being handcuffed on the front steps of her palatial estate. Her designer heels scraped against the marble as she screamed, "This is a mistake. You don't know who I am." But the truth was darker than anyone could have imagined. Right behind her, standing in shock with tears streaming down her face, was Emily Carter, the maid holding Richard's infant son, protecting him as if her life depended on it. The crowd gasped when the officers read out the charges. "Victoria Hayes, you are under arrest for conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, and endangerment of a minor." Reporters shouted questions. Cameras clicked. The scene was pure chaos. And yet, in the middle of all the noise, Emily clutched the baby tighter, whispering, "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." That moment was the beginning of a story that would unravel lies, betrayal, and the shocking truth that no one ever expected. But how did it all lead here? How did the glamorous wife of a millionaire end up in handcuffs, accused of plotting the kidnapping of her own husband's child? To understand, we need to go back just a few weeks earlier, when Emily, the quiet maid from San Diego, first realized something was terribly wrong inside the Hayes mansion. Emily had been working for the family for only 2 months. She was young, in her early 20s, and came from a humble background, juggling cleaning jobs to support her younger brother and grandmother back home. At first, the Hayes estate felt like a dream. Endless hallways, shimmering chandeliers, and staff who spoke in hushed tones. But underneath all that luxury, Emily quickly noticed something off, especially with baby Ethan. He was left crying in his crib for hours, his needs ignored, his cries echoing through the mansion walls. And on one unforgettable night, Emily walked into the nursery to find Ethan screaming uncontrollably, his diaper soaked, his little body trembling from hunger. There was no nanny, no mother, just the baby abandoned. She picked him up in her arms, tears stinging her eyes, and whispered, "Don't worry, little one. I'm here." That choice, to hold and protect him, set everything in motion. The next morning, Emily came down to the kitchen exhausted, having stayed up most of the night rocking baby Ethan back to sleep. She expected to find Victoria Hayes, the millionaire's wife, worried or at least asking about her son. But Victoria was sitting at the marble island in her silk robe, sipping champagne at 9 in the morning, laughing into her phone about an upcoming gala. Emily's stomach tightened. How could a mother be so cold? When Victoria finally glanced at her, she only said, "Next time, don't meddle in things that don't concern you." Richard Hayes, the husband, was a different story. He was a powerful figure in the finance world, a man who had built his empire from scratch in New York before moving his family to California. But since his wife's arrest that night, everyone wanted to know, what did Richard really see in Victoria? The truth was, Richard had been blinded for years by her beauty, her charm, and the image of a perfect high society marriage. It wasn't until Emily stepped into the picture that he started to see the cracks. One evening, Richard came home late from a business trip. He quietly entered the nursery, and what he found shook him. Emily was there, cradling Ethan in her arms, singing a soft lullaby from her childhood in a small church in San Diego. Ethan's tiny hand clutched Emily's shirt, and for the first time in months, the baby was sleeping peacefully. Richard froze in the doorway, guilt washing over him. Why is this young maid the only one showing love to my son? But Victoria didn't like what she saw either. From that moment, jealousy began to boil inside her. She noticed Richard watching Emily with something like admiration, noticed the baby reaching out to Emily more than to his own mother. That jealousy soon turned into something darker, an obsession with removing Emily from their lives at any cost. It started with small things, harsh words, extra tasks, impossible demands. Emily endured them because she needed the job and she couldn't leave Ethan defenseless. But then, one day, she overheard a phone call Victoria made. A name, a meeting, a plan. It sounded harmless at first, until Emily realized it involved Ethan. Her heart pounded as she pressed her ear closer to the study door. What she discovered would change everything. And trust me, you won't believe the scheme Victoria was hiding behind those mansion walls. What Emily uncovered next will leave you speechless. Emily held her breath as she pressed closer to the study door. Victoria's voice was sharp, cold, nothing like the charming socialite she showed the world. The maid is getting too close. Tomorrow, you take the baby from the nursery, through the back gate. No one will suspect a thing. Emily's knees nearly buckled. She wasn't just neglectful. Victoria was planning something horrifying. She wanted to get rid of her husband's own child. Terrified, Emily backed away quietly, her hands trembling. She ran up to her small room in the staff quarters and sat on the bed, replaying every word she had just heard. Her first instinct was to call the police, but who would believe her? She was just a maid. Victoria was the wealthy, untouchable wife of Richard Hayes, and if Emily accused her without proof, she'd be out of a job or worse, thrown out before she could protect Ethan. That night, Emily barely slept. She tiptoed into the nursery every hour, checking on the baby, watching the door as if Victoria might appear at any second. In the faint glow of the nightlight, Ethan's little chest rose and fell as he slept, completely unaware of the danger looming over him. Emily whispered a promise to him. "I'll protect you, no matter what it takes." The next day, Victoria's attitude was eerily calm. She smiled at Emily, complimented her work, even handed her $100 bill as a tip. But Emily could feel the tension behind that smile, the venom hiding just beneath the surface. And when she spotted a man in a black SUV parked across the street watching the house, her suspicion became certainty. This wasn't paranoia. Something was about to happen. Emily's heart raced as she made her decision. She couldn't stay quiet. She couldn't let this go. She needed to warn Richard even if it cost her job. She needed him to know the truth about the woman he married before it was too late. But what Richard did when Emily finally revealed the truth was something no one could have predicted. Emily waited until late evening when Richard returned from his office downtown. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, briefcase in hand. She stopped him in the hallway, her hands trembling. "Mr. Hayes, I need to tell you something. Something about your wife." Richard frowned, instantly alert. He guided her into his office and closed the door. "Go on," he said, his voice firm but uneasy. She took a deep breath and told him everything, every word she had overheard. The strange SUV outside, the way Victoria had treated Ethan. Her voice cracked when she said, "She's planning to take your baby. She doesn't care about him. I know how this sounds, but please, you have to believe me." Richard leaned back in his chair, silent, his jaw tight. He wanted to dismiss it. He wanted to believe his wife wasn't capable of such cruelty. But a memory flashed. Coming home late, finding Ethan crying alone while Victoria was at some charity gala. Another time when Ethan was sick and Victoria refused to cancel a spa trip. And then, the look on Emily's face now. It wasn't ambition. It wasn't drama. It was fear, raw, genuine fear. Richard rubbed his temples. "If what you're saying is true, Emily, then my son is in danger. But I can't just accuse her without proof. Do you understand how this would look?" Emily's heart sank. Proof. That was exactly what she didn't have. Still, she nodded. "Then let me find it, please. Just keep Ethan safe until I do." Richard hesitated, torn between the woman he had promised to love and the maid who was risking everything for his child. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Emily, but if you're wrong—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The weight of what was at stake hung heavy in the room. And just when Emily thought things couldn't get more dangerous, Victoria made her boldest move yet. The following afternoon, the mansion was unusually quiet. Emily noticed it right away. The chef wasn't in the kitchen, the driver hadn't come back from errands, and most of the staff had been dismissed early. Only Victoria was home, and she was far too calm. Emily's instincts screamed that this wasn't an accident. Something was happening. Emily climbed the stairs to check on Ethan. The nursery door was half open. Inside, Victoria stood over the crib, her manicured hands reaching down to lift the baby. Emily froze, her pulse hammering in her throat. "What are you doing?"
she demanded.
Victoria turned slowly, her face a mask of icy control. "Taking my son for some air." "Do you have a problem with that?" Emily's eyes darted to the window. Outside, the same black SUV idled at the curb. The driver's door was open, and a man leaned against it waiting. This wasn't just a stroll. This was the moment Victoria had planned. "He doesn't need air," Emily said firmly, stepping into the room. "He needs protection from you." Victoria's smile was venomous. "You think you can stop me? You're just a maid. No one will ever believe you over me. Now step aside, unless you want to regret it." She reached down for Ethan, but Emily moved faster. She grabbed the baby into her arms and held him tight against her chest. "Over my dead body," Emily whispered. The tension crackled in the air. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Richard was back earlier than expected. He froze in the doorway, taking in the scene. Emily clutching the baby, Victoria glaring with rage, and the black SUV still waiting outside. This was it, the moment that would change everything. But what happened next would turn the entire mansion into chaos and leave everyone's life upside down. Richard's voice thundered through the nursery. "What the hell is going on here?" Victoria's face shifted instantly, softening into a mask of innocence. "Richard, thank God you're here. This maid, she's lost her mind. She tried to steal our son." Emily's jaw dropped. "That's a lie." She was handing Ethan to the man outside in the SUV. She turned desperately to Richard, her arms still wrapped protectively around the baby. For a split second, the room held its breath. Richard's eyes darted between the two women. Victoria's crocodile tears, Emily's trembling resolve, the SUV waiting just beyond the gates. It all collided in his mind. His chest tightened as he realized the truth. The woman he married was capable of betraying them all. Suddenly, Richard bolted to the window and shouted for the guards. "Shut the gates! Call the police now!" His booming command shattered Victoria's composure. She lunged toward Emily, clawing for the baby. Emily stumbled back, shielding Ethan with her body, while Richard grabbed his wife by the wrist and yanked her away. "Enough!" he roared. "I've seen all I need to see." Victoria's mask cracked, her face twisting with rage. "You'll regret this, Richard. She's turning you against me. Do you have any idea who I am?" Richard's voice was low but cutting. "Yes, you're the woman who tried to destroy my family." The guards stormed in, pinning Victoria's arms as she thrashed and screamed. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Emily clutched Ethan tighter, her knees weak with relief and terror. She looked at Richard, tears in her eyes. I told you she wanted to take him." For the first time, Richard placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "And you saved him, Emily. You saved my son." But the drama was far from over. The police were about to arrive, and what they uncovered would shock the entire neighborhood. And just when you think the nightmare is over, the truth the police revealed next will blow your mind. Minutes later, the flashing lights of LAPD patrol cars lit up the mansion driveway. Officers rushed inside, taking control of the chaos. Victoria, still restrained by the guards, shouted at the police chief. "This is a mistake. I'm Victoria Hayes, wife of Richard Hayes. You'll regret this. My lawyers will bury you all." But the officers didn't flinch. One of them pulled out a warrant. "Ma'am, we have evidence linking you to attempted kidnapping. You're under arrest." The moment was surreal. Neighbors crowded outside the gates, filming on their phones, whispering in disbelief. The glamorous woman they had envied for years was being led away in handcuffs. Her diamond bracelet glittered under the harsh red and blue lights, a final reminder of the life she had clung to so desperately. Emily stood frozen, still holding Ethan, watching the scene unfold with wide, tear-filled eyes. Inside the mansion, detectives began collecting evidence. They confiscated Victoria's phone, her laptop, and even the SUV parked outside. When they opened the glove compartment, they found cash envelopes and fake IDs, proof that this wasn't just neglect or jealousy. It was a calculated plan. Richard's face went pale as he realized how deep the betrayal went. One of the officers turned to Richard. "Mr. Hayes will need you to testify, but I promise you, this woman won't be walking free any time soon." Richard nodded grimly, then looked at Emily. Her arms were still wrapped around his son, her face a mixture of fear and strength. In that moment, he knew the truth. Without her, his child would have been gone forever. As Victoria was shoved into the back of a squad car, she locked eyes with Emily. Her glare was pure venom, a silent promise that this wasn't over. Emily shivered, clutching Ethan tighter. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. The world finally saw the real Victoria Hayes, but you won't believe what the investigation uncovered about Victoria's past. Secrets that shocked even Richard to his core. Over the following weeks, investigators dug deeper into Victoria Hayes's past. What they uncovered stunned even the detectives. There were bank transfers to offshore accounts, late-night calls to known criminals in Las Vegas, and records of gambling debts so high they could have sunk Richard's fortune if discovered. It wasn't just about jealousy of Emily. It was about money, power, and survival at any cost. Richard sat in his office staring at the files the detectives handed him. Every page was another knife to the chest. Receipts, recordings, even photos of Victoria meeting with the man from the black SUV outside a seedy motel in Long Beach. "How could I have been so blind?" he whispered to himself, his voice breaking. Emily, standing quietly nearby, didn't know what to say. Sometimes silence was the only comfort, but it wasn't just Richard who was shocked. The press devoured every detail of the scandal. Headlines screamed across Los Angeles Times and New York Post, "Millionaire's wife, arrested in kidnapping plot," and from glamour to handcuffs, Victoria Hayes's fall. Social media exploded, and suddenly everyone had an opinion. Emily, once invisible in the mansion, became the unspoken hero of the story. When Richard finally sat down with his lawyers, they warned him the case would be brutal. Victoria had money, connections, and she would fight dirty to protect herself. But Richard shook his head. "I don't care how ugly it gets. I'll testify. I'll make sure Ethan never has to fear her again." Emily swallowed hard, realizing what was ahead, a long, painful trial where her every action would be judged. The day the trial began, the courthouse in downtown Los Angeles was swarmed with cameras. Victoria stepped out in a designer suit, still trying to play the role of a victim. Emily walked in quietly behind Richard, holding Ethan's small hand, the image of humility and truth. The stage was set for a battle that would decide everything, and just when it seemed the trial couldn't get any more dramatic, Victoria made a shocking move in court that no one expected. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the trial began. The judge, a stern woman with years of experience, banged her gavel for silence. On one side sat Victoria Hayes. Her lawyers lined up in tailored suits, whispering strategies. On the other side sat Richard, his shoulders tense, and Emily, who clutched her hands together nervously. Reporters filled the benches, their pens ready to capture every word. The prosecution opened with powerful evidence, bank transfers, incriminating text messages, and the surveillance footage of the black SUV outside the mansion. The jury leaned forward, their eyes narrowing as the puzzle pieces fit together. But Victoria's defense team hit back hard, painting Emily as a desperate maid trying to manipulate her way into the family's wealth. She wanted to replace Victoria. "That's the real story here," one lawyer said, pointing at Emily. Her face flushed with humiliation, but she held her ground. Richard was called to the stand. His voice trembled at first, but soon it grew steady. He described what he had seen with his own eyes. Victoria lunging for Ethan, Emily shielding the baby, and the SUV waiting at the curb. "I loved my wife," he admitted, his voice breaking. "But the woman sitting here today is not the woman I thought I married." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's expression softened. Then it was Emily's turn. She took the stand, hands shaking, and recounted everything, every cry she heard from the nursery, every cruel word Victoria spat at her, every sleepless night she spent protecting Ethan. Her voice cracked when she said, "I'm not his mother, but I would have died before letting anyone hurt that child." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jurors wiped at their eyes, but just when it seemed the case was sealed, Victoria suddenly stood up, slamming her hands on the table. "This is a circus. None of you know the truth," she screamed, pointing at Emily. "She's the thief here, not me. I am the victim." The judge banged the gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. The mask Victoria had worn for so long was slipping in front of everyone, but what Victoria blurted out next in her rage turned the entire trial upside down. The courtroom erupted in gasps as Victoria shouted, her face red with fury. Her lawyers tugged at her sleeve, begging her to sit down, but she ignored them. "Do you people understand who I am? I built this life. That baby was never mine, never my problem. He was just in the way." The words slipped out like poison, hanging heavy in the air. The jury froze. Even the judge's gavel couldn't erase what had just been admitted in front of everyone. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She gripped the edge of the witness stand, staring at Victoria in disbelief. Richard's face turned white, his hands clenching into fists. The gallery buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously, cameras clicking non-stop. This wasn't just arrogance anymore. This was a confession, raw and undeniable. The prosecutor wasted no time. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you just heard it with your own ears." She admitted it. She saw that child as nothing more than an obstacle, a pawn in her twisted game. Victoria tried to backtrack, shouting that she was misheard, that the stress made her speak nonsense. But the damage was irreversible. The jury members exchanged glances, their decision already forming. Richard stood, unable to contain his rage. "You tried to destroy everything, Victoria. My son, my family, my life. And for what? Greed, jealousy. You don't deserve our name. You don't deserve freedom." The judge sternly called for order again, but Richard's words echoed in the silence that followed. Emily looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not just a wealthy man, but a father fighting for his child. Finally, the verdict came. "We find the defendant, Victoria Hayes, guilty on all counts." Gasps filled the courtroom, followed by applause from the gallery. Victoria collapsed into her chair, stunned, as officers moved in to take her away. She screamed Richard's name one last time, but he didn't turn back. His eyes were fixed on Emily, who sat quietly with Ethan in her arms, tears streaming down her cheeks. Justice had finally been served, but even after the guilty verdict, what happened next in Richard and Emily's lives will surprise you even more. When the trial was over, the courthouse slowly emptied, leaving Richard and Emily in the quiet echo of the hallways. Richard walked beside her, his hand brushing Ethan's tiny back, as the boy rested against Emily's shoulder. For the first time in months, the weight on his chest seemed to lift. He turned to her and said softly, "I don't even know how to thank you. You saved my son. You saved me." Emily lowered her gaze, her cheeks warming. "I just did what any decent person would do," she whispered, though deep down, she knew it had been more than that. The days that followed were a blur of reporters at the gate, headlines on every channel, and endless phone calls from business partners asking Richard how he planned to move forward. But inside the mansion, life finally slowed. Ethan laughed again, his cries fading into giggles as Emily played peekaboo with him in the nursery. For the first time in a long while, there was peace. Richard often found himself pausing in the doorway, watching them. The sight of Emily gently rocking his son, humming a tune from her childhood in San Diego, stirred something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt since before tragedy entered his life. It wasn't just gratitude. It was admiration, respect, and a quiet longing he was afraid to name. One evening, after putting Ethan to bed, Emily stepped out into the garden for fresh air. The California sky was painted orange and pink as the sun dipped behind the hills. Richard joined her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. They stood in silence for a moment before he said, "You've changed everything, Emily. You've shown me what family really means." Her eyes met his, searching, cautious. He wasn't a man easily broken, But he was a man learning to heal, and while Emily wasn't ready to imagine what the future might hold between them, she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't just the maid anymore. She had become something far greater, the heart of the Hayes family. But destiny still had more surprises in store for both of them, because what came next for Richard, Emily, and little Ethan was a twist that no one could have seen coming. Months passed, and the Hayes mansion no longer echoed with tension. Instead, it brimmed with warmth, laughter in the hallways, music from the piano in the living room, and the sound of Ethan's small feet learning to run across the polished floors. Emily, once just the maid, now moved freely around the house, trusted and respected, her presence woven into every part of the family's daily life. Richard had changed too. He no longer spent endless nights buried in meetings in downtown Los Angeles or obsessing over market reports from Wall Street. Instead, he chose mornings with Ethan, walking him through the rose garden, and dinners at the family table, where Emily often prepared meals, inspired by her grandmother's recipes from San Diego. For the first time in years, he was present, not just as a millionaire, but as a father. But the shadow of the past never disappeared entirely. Every so often, reporters would revive the story, calling Emily a hero maid or branding Victoria as the disgraced socialite. Richard tried to shield Emily from the noise, but she would always smile and say, "We know the truth. That's enough." Still, whispers among acquaintances questioned the closeness growing between them, stirring curiosity and even judgment. Late one evening, Richard found himself sitting on the terrace, overlooking the lights of Los Angeles glittering below. Emily joined him with a blanket draped around her shoulders. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I built an empire chasing numbers, but all the money in the world didn't matter until you showed me what I was missing." Emily's eyes widened, her heart racing. She opened her mouth to speak, but he only smiled gently, letting the moment linger. Life was no longer about survival or appearances. It was about rebuilding, about finding something real in the ashes of betrayal. And just as Emily began to believe things were settling into peace, fate prepared one more turn that would test the strength of the bond they were building. Because the next challenge that arrived at their doorstep would prove whether this new family could truly survive together. One quiet Saturday morning, just as Emily was preparing breakfast, the doorbell rang. Richard, still in his robe, opened the door to find a stranger on the porch, a woman in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a confidence that didn't waver. She introduced herself as Monica Turner, an investigative journalist from New York. She had come all the way to Los Angeles chasing one story: Victoria Hayes. Richard immediately wanted to turn her away. "That chapter's closed," he said firmly. But Monica leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Not entirely. Victoria is talking from prison, and she claims she wasn't acting alone." Emily froze in the doorway, a glass of orange juice trembling in her hand. If Victoria was stirring trouble from her cell, their peace might not last long. Over the following days, Monica's words haunted Richard. Could there really have been someone else behind the plan? Or was this just Victoria's final attempt to destroy them? Emily watched the unease return to his face, the same tension that once consumed him during boardroom battles. She reached for his hand. "Don't let her control you from behind bars. We've built something stronger than her lies." But the journalist didn't stop there. A week later, an article exploded across social media: the untold truth behind the Hayes scandal. It painted Emily not as a hero, but as a schemer who had cleverly inserted herself into Richard's life. Old photos from her hometown were twisted to make her look suspicious, and quotes from anonymous sources questioned her motives. Emily's heart sank as she scrolled through the cruel headlines. "They're making me look like the villain," she whispered, her voice breaking. Richard slammed his laptop shut, fury burning in his eyes. "Enough! I won't let anyone smear you after everything you've done." But Emily knew this was more than gossip. It was a test of their bond. The world was watching, ready to judge whether their story was truth or just another scandal. and what Richard chose to do next, in front of the entire world, would define their future forever. The articles spread like wildfire, appearing on every news feed from Los Angeles to New York. Emily couldn't even step outside without feeling eyes on her, whispers trailing behind, as if she were guilty of something she hadn't done. She tried to hide the pain, but Richard saw it. He found her in the nursery one night, rocking Ethan, tears streaking her face. "I can handle the cleaning, the work, even the stairs," she whispered, "but not people thinking I'd ever hurt this family." Richard knelt beside her, his voice steady but filled with fire. "Then let me set the record straight." The very next morning, he called a press conference at his downtown Los Angeles headquarters. The room was packed with cameras, reporters eager for more scandal. Richard walked in with Emily at his side, her hand trembling slightly in his. He stood at the podium, his gaze sharp, his voice unshakable. "You've all heard the lies," Richard began. "But here's the truth. This woman, Emily Carter, risked her life to protect my son. Without her, Ethan wouldn't be here today. She is not a schemer, not a villain. She is the reason my family is still standing." His words echoed through the hall, silencing even the most skeptical reporters. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears as the crowd scribbled furiously, their lenses now capturing a different story. A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Hayes, are you admitting you have feelings for her? That this is more than just gratitude?" The question hung in the air like a spark. Emily's breath caught. Richard looked at her, then back at the room. His pause was deliberate, his answer simple. "Yes, and I'm not ashamed of it." Gasps rippled through the room as flashbulbs exploded. Emily's knees nearly gave out. She had never expected Richard to go that far, not in public, not under the crushing weight of media scrutiny. Yet instead of panic, she felt a surge of relief. He had chosen truth. He had chosen her. And in that moment, the narrative shifted completely, from scandal to survival, from suspicion to love. But the moment they stepped out of that press room, an even bigger surprise was waiting for them. As soon as Richard and Emily stepped out of the press room, the flashing cameras followed them like a storm. But waiting just beyond the crowd, in the lobby of the building, was a face Emily hadn't seen in years. Her younger brother, Daniel. She froze, her heart pounding. He had been living back in San Diego, struggling after their grandmother passed, and she hadn't expected him to come. Now he stood there, tears in his eyes, holding a worn backpack slung over his shoulder. "Em?" His voice cracked as he stepped forward. Emily nearly dropped her purse as she rushed into his arms. For years, she had carried the weight of protecting her family alone, but now, for the first time, she felt that weight lift. Reporters tried to shove cameras closer, but Richard quickly signaled his security to give them space. This wasn't for headlines. This was family. Daniel pulled back, his hands still on Emily's shoulders. "I saw everything. I read about what you did. You're not just my sister anymore, you're a hero. Grandma would be so proud of you." Emily's chest tightened, tears streaming freely now. Richard watched quietly, his own heart stirring at the sight. For all the money he had, he knew he could never buy a moment like this. Richard gently stepped closer, placing his arm protectively around Emily and Ethan. "Daniel, your sister saved my son. She saved my life. And as long as I'm here, she'll never carry this burden alone again." The sincerity in his voice left Daniel speechless. And for the first time, Emily saw the beginning of something she thought she'd never have. Not just love, but a family united. The cameras still flashed, the headlines still churned, but for Emily the world seemed to go silent. Surrounded by Richard, Ethan, and Daniel, she realized the story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about survival, resilience, and the power of love that rises even from the darkest places. Weeks after the press conference, life slowly began to settle. The noise of the scandal started fading, replaced by quiet mornings in Beverly Hills and evenings filled with Ethan's laughter. Emily had begun taking nursing classes at UCLA, something she had always dreamed of, but never had the chance to pursue. Richard supported her every step of the way, encouraging her to chase her own future. But one evening, Richard asked Emily to join him for dinner, not in the mansion, but at a small Italian restaurant in downtown Los Angeles. The kind of place she never expected a man of his wealth to choose. Over candlelight and pasta, he spoke softly. "I used to think happiness came from success, from wealth, from building a name people couldn't forget. But none of that ever filled the emptiness. You did, Emily. You brought life back into my home, into my son, into me." Emily's heart raced as she tried to process his words. Before she could reply, Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel, didn't make a spectacle. He simply opened it, showing a delicate diamond ring that shimmered under the dim light. "I don't want to keep calling you just the maid who saved us. I want to call you my partner, my family. Emily Carter, will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop. Emily covered her mouth with her hands, tears filling her eyes. For a moment, she thought of her grandmother, of the nights she cried herself to sleep in San Diego, of the baby she once promised to protect no matter what. Then she looked at Richard, her voice trembling but strong. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The restaurant erupted in quiet applause from strangers who had witnessed the moment. Richard slipped the ring onto her finger, and for the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was loved, chosen, and ready to build the life she had never dared to dream. And while you may think this is the end of the story, the way their new life began together was even more inspiring. The wedding wasn't a glamorous Beverly Hills event. Richard and Emily chose something smaller, more intimate, a chapel near the cliffs of Malibu, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The salty breeze carried the sound of waves crashing as Emily walked down the aisle in a simple ivory dress, holding Ethan's tiny hand. Richard stood at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers, his smile filled with gratitude and love. Daniel was there, beaming with pride, standing as Emily's witness. A handful of close friends, a few trusted colleagues of Richard, and some of Emily's old neighbors from San Diego filled the pews. There were no paparazzi, no flashing cameras, just warmth, sincerity, and the quiet joy of a family being rebuilt. When Emily and Richard exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Meanwhile, miles away in a grey cell at the California Institution for Women, Victoria sat alone. Her once perfectly styled hair was unkempt, her manicured nails broken. The newspapers no longer wrote about her. The friends who once filled her home had vanished, and her calls to lawyers went unanswered. She was forgotten, a ghost trapped in her own downfall. Back in Malibu, as the ceremony ended, Richard lifted Ethan into his arms while Emily held Daniel's hand. Together, they walked down the aisle as husband and wife, not into luxury or status, but into a new life built on truth, sacrifice, and second chances. The applause that followed wasn't just for a wedding, it was for survival, for justice, for love, as the sun dipped below the horizon. Painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Richard whispered to Emily, "This is just the beginning," and for the first time in her life, Emily believed it. The maid who had once been invisible was now the heart of a family, loved and cherished, her story rewritten forever. What did you think of Emily's journey, from maid to hero, from sacrifice to love? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will move your heart.